David works at Manifold Markets, a prediction markets website. He is responsible for marketing, product design, community building, user research, and memeing on Twitter. He was previously a professional gamer and a full-time Twitch streamer before he was recruited by the Manifold founders. As a reminder, if you have questions for David, you can submit them via the Swap Card app. So you just want to open the app and navigate to this event, and you can go on the Q&A tab. And if there is time at the end, I will select a mixture of prepared and audience questions to ask our speaker. Please welcome David.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. I guess we'll start with an icebreaker so as people are coming in. So yeah, just to start us off, we're just going to start. I just want you to start brainstorming some questions you have, what's on your mind lately, and something that you're excited about, something that you actually have control over, and something that's you're worried about, just whatever's been on your mind over the last couple of days. There's some examples there. So yeah, you could just and then introduce yourself to the person next to you, and just you can tell your questions. I don't know, it's not, you just come up with some questions because we'll use them later on. Yeah, and then yeah, I'll just wait a couple minutes then as people come in. Also, once you've thought some questions, and if you're sitting and have nothing to do, you can download Manifold Markets, which is the app I work on. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll just wait a couple minutes, and then we'll move on. Okay, great. Let's get started then. So why is thinking in probabilities important? I guess that's the first question we really have to answer. So I mean, some people, they might just be like, oh, either it happens or it doesn't. It's 50-50. It's a bit of a meme for people who do actively think in probabilities. We used to always say it all the time with my gamer friends who played strategy card games, and it was all about probability. If we didn't want to think, we'd just either it happens or it doesn't. But even though this is funny, a lot of people internally, they actually do think like this on some level. If you're not actively trying to quantify things and think about things in terms of probability, you do tend to lean to either 0%, 50%, or 100%. Your mind kind of skews. Yeah, and you really don't think of an accurate number. So the first thing though is, with every single decision you make, you are making a prediction. If you're thinking about, oh, will I be to EAG on time if I walk my dog quickly beforehand? You're making an evaluation and you're predicting, okay, if this happens, could these different scenarios occur? Will I be on time? So I think it's important to realize that every single decision you make, there's some sort of prediction aspect going on internally, even if you're not thinking about it. Yeah, people just aren't great at subconsciously estimating things. I mean, as human species, we are amazing at it, but we can all get way better. And it's all about maximizing expected value. So, one of my co-founders of Manifold, Austin, he's always if you're not late to at least a couple flights in your life and you don't miss a couple of flights, you're probably not actually maximizing expected value because you're wasting too much time. Obviously, you can do the time cost calculations of my time is worth this much money, therefore I can probably miss a few flights, and that saved me more money overall than if I get to the airport 3 hours early every single time and just waste 3 hours at the airport every single time. So there's all about predicting, doing some calculations, and then getting the most expected value as possible. Okay, so problems with framing uncertainty. So this is Steven. He's another of the co-founders of Manifold. Right here, this is him in Mexico eating a bug. But we were having this conversation the other day that I thought was quite interesting. He's been working with numbers his whole life. He's the founder of a predictions market company. And so we were talking about China, Taiwan. What are the odds that Taiwan invades China? And he was saying, oh, I think it's very likely that China will invade Taiwan. And I was like, really? I don't think it's that likely. The prediction markets say it's 9% in the next 2 years right now or something on Manifold. Yeah, there you go. And So I was like, huh, really? I don't think it's that likely. And we kind of had like a bit of a debate for 5 minutes. And I was like, hold on. What's like, give me a number. What probability do you think is going to occur that China invades Taiwan? I don't remember the time frame we were using, but it was just a rough number. He's like, oh, maybe like 20%. I was like, 20%? How is that very likely? And so obviously, relative to like maybe the perceived baseline of what a lot of people think is the probability, it's like very likely. So to him, that's why he chose to frame it that way. But obviously to me, I'm thinking, oh, very likely probably means like above 50%, maybe like 60, 70%. That's what very likely means to me. So I think the media does this a lot as well. Some like, oh, there's a chance nuclear war is increasing slightly because of what Putin's doing. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, it's like so likely that nuclear war is going to happen. But really, they're saying relative to like the previous like 4% chance of nuclear war, there's now like a 8% chance or something. And it's very easy to like overhype the probability of something happening, especially when you're not quantifying it. So those are some problems we see nowadays with how just like on a day-to-day people interact. So yeah, quantification, it keeps the conversation grounded. It can also reduce anxiety. When there's like uncertainty, people like don't have numbers. It's like, oh, it's likely to happen. Like that can mean a lot of things. Your brain can like, and shared interpretation of the question. So this is another one. When Stephen thinks China's invading Taiwan, in his mind, he's thinking, oh, if they like advance on like some random contested small island between the two nations, that counts. Whereas to me, I might be thinking, oh, I'm only thinking of like a mainland Taiwan invasion. So making sure you're on the same page as like what the question is you're predicting about is also super important. Okay, so there's a few different types of forecasting methods that people currently use. There's like individual forecasts where people just have like their own Substacks, their own journals. They like write down some of the predictions. There's polls, which you can have like, you can poll like a niche expert group of individuals, or you can have like big widespread polls accessible to everyone. There's a site called Meticulous. Oh, those boxes, they should be like orange circles, by the way. Whoops. But yeah, you have Meticulous, which is like, it aggregates a community. Everyone has to like input their own like number on what they think the chances of happening, and then it kind of aggregates that and like generates like a probability of the market. It's not actually a market though. And then there's prediction markets, which is what I work on, which it's like a stock market. You have a percentage, you have people that can buy yes shares, buy no shares, and based on what people buy, it moves what the current probability is. And it works kind of like sports betting odds. So yeah, I guess with prediction markets, the biggest advantage you get the real-time updates. With polls, you do a poll, then there's like maybe some events and news happens, and you don't get like the live updating probability. And there's also, I think the key one is there's better incentives. There's not really real money prediction markets currently because of regulation. There's like too many blockers, and like people are like, oh, it's too similar to gambling, whatever. But even with play money prediction markets, which is what Manifold is, which I work on, we have people go like get crazy invested in like getting their play money score go up. We've had like people spend like tens of thousands of real dollars because they like want to try and like win a market and like profit from it. So prediction markets just have like a sort of incentive that like polls and individuals like don't have. I guess there's like some ego aspect to like individual forecasting, but besides that, there isn't much. Okay, so the next thing is we need to ask the right questions. So this one is like I don't know if you're familiar with like the FTX scandal, like SBF imploding. A lot of people afterwards on EA forum was like, oh, like shouldn't we have saw this coming? Like how do we have like no idea about any of this? So actually on Manifold, a few weeks or like a couple months before it happened, you can see that someone actually created this market. This is like a user created market. And you can see it kind of like was around 5 to 10% because there was no strong signal. And then all of a sudden the news came out and like it spiked up like rapidly. So this is just to give you an example of how the markets work and what they look like if you're not familiar. But also there is like a skill of being able to figure out what is the right question I should be asking, because before you can even like start betting and like predicting things, if you don't have like the right question, then what are you doing? So this is one of the main things we're going to focus on in this talk. So yeah, anticipating possible events is hard. And then turning them into a question that takes into account all the variables is even harder. So for example, there was this question on our site, which was, will Twitter be open source, all code used to recommend tweets? And so the creator of this market, they were really after one thing. They're like, will Elon like stick to his word? You know, he like says a lot, he talks up a lot. Like, is he actually gonna like stick to his word? Is he gonna follow through? Like, oh, is he really gonna do this? And you can see it didn't actually, this is a resolved market, but it didn't resolve yes or no. It resolved NA, which basically means the market gets canceled and everyone gets their money back. And the reason this market resolved NA is because what ended up happening is something like most of the source code got released, but maybe not quite all of it. But it wasn't like obvious at first. And then there was like, well, to the original intent of the question, like Elon Musk, he did follow through on his word, and he did like open source code, pretty much all of the code, but maybe not quite all of it. So like to the original intent of the question, it should resolve yes. But based on like the technicalities and the wording, will open source all code? It didn't actually open source all code. And so there's like a lot of debate and like arguments, and then people are like, well, maybe Elon Musk actually did intend and he thought he had released all the code, but he didn't and didn't realize it. So like, really, this should be yes. And you know, it's like you just like don't foresee these things always when like trying to like think of a question. But sometimes like, it's like actually the case where it's like halfway through, because you can see it like spiked and then it rapidly starts declining back down to 25% as people realize, oh wait, like there's actually some controversy about whether this has all been released or not. So it's really hard to anticipate this. So yeah, so now we're gonna have a bit of a market creation exercise. So the main things you need is you need your title, which you want to summarize it, but also like it should in itself be like describe the resolution criteria. You need to have a closing time. This is mostly just so people knows when does like trading on the market cease and it stops. You need a resolution time, which is different sometimes from a closing time, because sometimes you have a question which is, will by X date this happen? And then sometimes it might prematurely resolve before the market actually closes. Other times you might want to close the market early and then have it resolve like a week or few days later, depending on if you don't want people trading all the way up to the final point of resolution. You need to have resolution criteria for yes and no. And are there any scenarios that could occur which would like make the market unresolvable, kind of like the previous example we showed? And yeah, any technicalities that could interfere. And especially because if these things do come up, it really does make like the whole point of like trying to predict on the market useless, right? Sure, you're still gonna have like some interesting number that maybe shows like 50% or like 40%, or like that one, you know, it showed 25%, but like that number is no longer like fulfilling what the original creator, what information they were after, right? Like forecasting is all about like truth seeking, trying to like learn information. And if you have like these weird technicalities that come up, which is going to influence the people trading on the market, because you know they don't necessarily care about like the info themselves. They just might want to make some profit from like trading accurately. So they will like take advantage of the technicalities in like the resolution criteria, and then you are no longer getting what you came after as the creator. So to use my previous example, so will London have widespread food delivery drones in 2025? Okay, so there's a lot of problems with this question, actually, that you might not realize if you haven't made lots of markets before. So the first one is, in 2025 is actually quite vague wording. This was surprising to me at first, but it could mean a lot of things. Some people in 2025 might think it has to be, like, by the time 2025 comes around, we should have them. So basically, by the end of December 31st, 2024 is actually what it means. Some people might think it has to be for like the whole of 2025. Some people might think like if they're available for like 1 day within 2025, that's fine. Some people might think it's by the end of 2025. Some people might think it's like up to 2025. It can resolve early. It's like actually in 2025 is quite vague. Widespread is super ambiguous. Let's say Uber Eats and Deliveroo, they don't use drones yet, but there's like a small tech startup that's doing it, and maybe they have like 1,000 people like have access to it from like an early rollout. Does that count as widespread? Probably not. What if there's like 50,000 people who use it, does that count as widespread? Where do you draw the line? What actually counts as widespread? And you can see how there could be arguments then about that if it's like not clear and it falls somewhere in a gray area. Does it have to be all of London? What if only like Canary Wharf has drone delivery, but nowhere else has access to it? Would that fulfill the requirements of this question? Once again, it's not clear if you don't specify. What if there's like some weird new robot invention that like is kind of like a drone, but isn't really like the existing drones? Does that count as a drone? What like counts as a drone in this question? Like there's so many like small things you wouldn't think about. You would think, oh, it's very obvious. Like in 2025, either we have drones or we don't. It's very easy to resolve this, yes or no. But there's actually like all these small things which come up. And at first, when you first create the market, like I said, it's probably fine. You get like some useful info. But as things transpire and like more weird factors unfold, especially if you're like trying to predict like super far into the future. Like how on earth are we going to like predict, like if we're trying to make a prediction about AGI in like 20 years, like who knows what's going to happen in AI up to then, right? So how can we even like begin to create like these resolution criteria that takes everything into account? Okay, so what you're going to do now is you're going to use the questions you wrote down during your icebreaker, or there's some example markets. These are all ones on our website that had like loads of issues and controversies with them, and most of them resolved NA. So if you want to challenge, pick one of these questions. Otherwise, feel free to use your own questions, like just any you think of. And yeah, I want you guys to try and like do the 1 through 7 of what I did. Maybe I would say pair up with someone next to you and work together on one question. And then once you're done making a question and you think it's robust as possible and there's like no loopholes or anything that can go wrong with it, then I want you to trade your question with another pair on your table next to you and have them try and nitpick and see if they can find any loopholes that they could potentially, like, any flaws they can find with your question and your criteria. Okay, yeah, I'll give you like 5 to 10 minutes. I guess we can just see how quick people are. Okay, yeah, great. So to repeat that, well, I won't be able to repeat it verbatim, but they basically, they modified it to be, you changed the word to by midnight of June, of the end of June. Yeah, by midnight, will anyone in the US without registration be able to access it? And I don't know, something else, I forget. But so yeah, so that is, I think the main problem with that market on our site itself was the word at was quite controversial. People were like, because within June, they did launch it, and then they removed it, like, afterwards. It was up briefly, like, publicly accessible. And then they're, like, planning to reintroduce. This market's still ongoing, by the way, so this market hasn't actually been NA'd yet. So you can go find it on Manifold if you want. But then they're, like, potentially bring it back, but it's not going to be, like, as a chatbot, or it's going to be, like, some other weird integration. So yeah, that's the problem with that market. If you want, you can follow along. It's like pretty interesting, the developments. There's like tons of comments of people arguing like what should count, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. So yeah, hopefully though from that exercise, the main thing I really wanted people to get to is, well, one, you just like have some better practice now at creating questions. But also just realize that like, when we're talking with each other and creating, like, saying our own predictions, like, people always say, I bet, I think this will, I predict. This is just very common. This just always comes up. Like, start listening for it. Like, after working at Manifold, I started listening for it. So, oh, what can I make into, like, an interesting prediction market? And I started listening when people, like, use these phrases and, like, make a prediction. And it's just, like, all the time it happens. But these predictions, they have so many underlying assumptions that you assume the person you're communicating to also, like, agrees with these assumptions or like have the same assumptions as you. And obviously like from this exercise, you can see that's like not always going to be the case. And I think that's really one of the defining things that makes prediction markets so powerful is not only are you sort of publics, or on Manifold particularly, we allow users to create the questions. So on other prediction market sites, like anyone, it's like the mods kind of like choose some questions and upload them. But yeah, on Manifold Markets, anyone creates them, and then people get feedback in the comments. They kind of like update the criteria relatively early before too many people have like made big investments. And it's more of a collaborative process where you can really like get to the questions that like everyone agrees on and that can actually maybe be actionable, hopefully. Okay, cool. So let's move on. So I just want to give like one more example to really like drive home the point of this idea of clear resolution criteria versus the spirit of the question, the intent the creator had when they first asked the question. So show of hands, who knows what like Petrov Day is and like the less wrong button thing? Okay, some people, like half the room. I'll explain for those who don't. So there's this forum called Less Wrong, and once a year there's this day called Petrov Day, where they do sort of like this celebration of this guy who double-checked before like entering the nuclear launch codes, and it turns out it was like an error, so good thing they double-checked. So on this day, though, they had this button on their site, and anyone can press the button, and if they press the button, the site gets taken down for the rest of the day. So there's this idea of like, will the community like press the button, or will like people be good and no one press the button? But the way it works is that like, I don't know, there's like a karma system on the site, so like people who like comment a lot, they have like a higher score. So the way it works on Less Wrong is that when the day first starts, only like a couple people of like the top most active people who are probably going to be more trustworthy, only they can press the button. And then as the day goes on, it lowers and lowers and lowers, and the threshold eventually at the end of the day, just any random person who has like no like good ranking at all can press the button and take the site down. So this market instead of resolving to yes or no, it actually resolves, you can resolve it to a particular probability. So with this market, it was going to be what percentage of the day would elapse before the button would get pressed. So people are kind of like betting on, will the trustworthy users resist? Like how random over anybody before like someone presses it, right? So you can see it started off at like 25% to 30%. People weren't that confident. They thought, oh, someone's going to crack and press it. So what happened is there was a bug that caused it so anyone could press the button and take the site down, regardless of like your ranking, which wasn't intended, but there's this bug that came up. So someone pressed the button and the site got taken down. And obviously that has interesting implications for this market, to say the least. So yes, according to this question and the resolution criteria, somebody did press the button and the site was taken down. So it should resolve at like, I don't know, it's probably like 10%, 5%. It was like pressed straight away by some random person probably. But then obviously that doesn't align with the spirit of the question. So yeah. It was really interesting, and then the page got brought back up. The admins was like, it was a bug, the button's back up. So people were like, oh, it doesn't count, the button's back up. And so people were like debating, and eventually they just decided to cancel the market because no one could agree whether they should count the second press, which was real, or if they should count the first. So I just want to give that example to really drive home the point that, well, it's more just, I think it's a fun story of prediction markets, and this is actually a problem that prediction markets have. It is true that it solves it in some sense, that there's like these assumptions that people have, but it is also a problem with prediction markets. But I think it's the one thing, there's one learning that's really interesting from this, that if you go on and make your own prediction markets, I would say consider, is that some of our creators now intentionally leave the resolution criteria to be somewhat ambiguous. So yes, they will state some like specific criteria, but they'll be like, but hold on, this is actually the intent of the question and what I'm trying to learn. And at the end of the day, these criteria, I might like choose to resolve it to yes or no if I feel that more strongly aligns with the spirit of the question as described. If these criteria no longer match with the spirit of the question as time has elapsed and like all these weird variables have come into play. So it's really interesting that sometimes having intentional ambiguity can be a good thing if it helps the probability you're generating actually be more actionable and useful. And then I just want to discuss some of the problems we have with long-term markets. Sometimes people just aren't interested in predicting things that are like 50 years away or even like after they've died. Like, why do I care? It's hard to know what the right question to ask that is useful. There's also an opportunity cost for the traders. As a market creator, you want as many people trading on your markets as possible because that's like theoretically going to give you the best information if you have more people weighing in. But are these traders going to want to trade on your market that's happening like super far into the future if they're like not going to get paid out for 50 years? So actually, some people, they ran an experiment on Manifold, which was, what's like the interest rate of markets? So they created these markets that like, this market will 100% resolve yes. That's it. It's just going to resolve yes. Buy as many yes shares as you want. But so the way so we have a AMM, an automated market maker. This is now getting into a bit more the advanced prediction market stuff. But so we have this automated market maker, and it kind of works similar to sports betting odds, where you're not actually directly interfacing with other users when you trade. You're interfacing with this AMM. So what it does is it has like a certain amount of shares, and when you buy shares yourself, you kind of trade some of the shares that you don't want to the AMM, and it gives you like some of the shares from the pool back to you. And then based on how many sort of shares are contained within this pool and what the liquidity is, it determines like what the current probability is. So people are betting up to like 97%, but once you get to 97% yes, it becomes really expensive to buy any more shares of yes, and essentially your payout is going to be like 1.01 of like what you're buying, for example, once it gets like above 99%, right? So you're having really minimal gains. So the question is like, how much are people willing to like buy up to, considering their capital is being locked up for a certain duration of time, and it still be worthwhile? So on these markets, it's kind of hard you can't really see on these graphs that well. So the first one though is that you can kind of see it's like, when it's like a few months out, it's like around 95% maybe, and then it slowly trends up to like 97%, and it kind of went up to like 98%, and it slowly like increases. But you can imagine like this is just a few months out. If the question is 50 years away, and it's not even like clear it's going to resolve yes, like how could this influence the probability? And on these markets, it's very clear how it influences the probability. It's like even though it's 100% yes, 6 months in advance, it's like 5% off or whatever. But if like you say, this is a question like, will AGI like exist in 10 years? You can imagine that like people, the probability actually gets influenced by like this hidden interest. So the way we solve this on Manifold is the second one. You can see it kind of goes up to 100% and like stays there. And that's because we introduced loans. So when people invest, they actually get their money given back to them fairly rapidly, so they can reinvest in it. It's not locked up anymore. And the hope of this is it doesn't actually like influence the probability as much. But yeah, it's just an interesting like thing about prediction markets that I guess I'd share. And yeah, the final point is that if like your play currency, or if you're a real money prediction market, real money becomes useless. Let's say maybe the world ends. That could be one example of money becoming useless. Maybe we move into an economy that doesn't like care or use money anymore because AGI is just like making everyone happy, feeding everyone, like meeting everyone's needs. We don't need money as much anymore. We go back to like trading goods or something. If money loses value there, then like obviously like that could affect it. If Manifold Markets itself, the platform you're predicting on, goes like bankrupt and we cease existing, then the play currency on that prediction market website, that score that you're working towards, your incentive, is no longer there. So because of that, people are more incentivized to, if it's like a by X date question, people are incentivized to like change how they're betting. Okay, the final thing I wanted to talk about before we move on to a Q&A. Oh, actually, no, sorry, there's two more things. I'm going to give you some tips on becoming a better predictor. But first, I wanted to talk about insider trading on prediction markets, because it's actually quite interesting. So with stock markets, insider trading is kind of frowned upon. Yeah, it's not the best. Maybe people don't like people who are insider trading, right? But on prediction markets, it's actually a good thing to have insider traders, question mark. So the reason it might be a good thing is that the goal with prediction markets, sure, for the end user is like make some sort of profit from trading. But for the creator who's asking the question, and well, even just people who are following along with the market as well, really all they want is the most accurate probability and information possible. And how do you get that? Well, it's with people who have an edge and have insider info coming and influencing the probability, because they're going to move it towards what it should be. Oh, actually, I didn't include the example, but one interesting example was ChatGPT 3 or 4, I think it was ChatGPT 4 release date. When was it going to be? We have like a bunch of OpenAI people who use Manifold, and they were like, they like told us afterwards they were actually like insider trading on the market. Or maybe it was like friends or people OpenAI. But anyways, we had like some people who had insider knowledge and they were trading. So actually, sadly I forgot to include the example, but we had like, it was like very high chance it would come out before like sometime in March or something, I think, I don't remember. But then there was like delays and it got cancelled, and then it like didn't come out by then, and a bunch of them like lost all their money, which they had been insider trading with. So kind of funny, they were like complaining to us about that. But yeah, you can see how that actually will like make the probability more accurate, which is a good thing if all you care about, and is what we really care about, is like providing the most accurate information and forecast possible. There are still some issues though. Right now with the way, and this is kind of an open-ended question I want people to sort of think about and think, how can we solve this? Because we ourselves, we haven't really come up with any ideas of how to solve this yet, is that how do we actually incentivize people to not just like kind of exploit their insider knowledge to like get profit, but how can we actually like make sure it really is reflected in the probability? Because what happens in reality is these people will come along, they'll place a few bets. To everyone, the majority of people trading on the market, they won't have the context of these bets. They might think, oh, it's some dumb trader, or it's someone who's just like really optimistic. And they're gonna like correct the probability back to what it was before. So it doesn't actually like, it isn't reflected in the probability. So there's like this problem where it's like, yes, theoretically it should be great, but in reality it just doesn't really work like that. And also there's this thing called limit orders, where you kind of create a standing order saying, I want to buy this much at this % for this price. And then instead of just buying a like bunch of shares immediately, you kind of wait over time for people to like match your order and like take you up on it at those odds. So what insider traders do, they can like set some limit orders that like doesn't immediately move the market that much. It kind of just like anyone who's like maybe super pessimistic and like they have insider info that it's going to come out like very soon, like they'll like absorb all the profit from that and like make it to the market. So there is like some upwards buying pressure in some sense, which yes, it is good for the probability, but it doesn't really influence the current probability, especially if it's going to get corrected quickly. So one idea we had was we could have like comment bounties. People could like comment, and then if like, and then the creator could like award like just a huge amount of mana to like anyone at the end if they like did provide valuable information that like really did reflect, like cause the, because if an insider person is like, okay, I have insider info, like this is my credentials, blah, 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 and everyone's like, oh, okay, yes, the market should be moved to like what this guy bet it to, and they will say that, and that's like good for the accuracy of the market. So it's like, we haven't found a good solution though, so that's just an open-ended question which I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on. Okay, so, and then I just wanted to end the talk with some practical advice on like how you can become a better forecaster yourself. So the first one really is just practicing. Most people, they just aren't used to thinking in terms of probabilities. You know, you think, oh, I think it's likely, I think it's unlikely. You don't really think, I think it's 60%. And don't get too worried about being like 63.4%, you know, like we're just not wired to like think to that degree of accuracy. But try and at least quantify to some sort of range. And then it's really important to record it. I bet everyone here has made tons of predictions across their lives, and at some point they'll be like, haha, I was right, but you know, it's not written down anywhere. There's obviously going to be like bias towards the times you were right and you forget all the times you were wrong. It's actually, if you really want to put an effort to practice and become a better forecaster, which I think is super important, because like I said, every single decision you ever make, you'll be predicting on some level. So it's really important to like assess your own calibration and how good you are. And the only way to do that is by recording it somehow. So like for me, you know, if I was someone sitting in this audience right now, I would go from this workshop and be like, that's great, yay, I'm gonna like write down, and I'm not gonna write down any of my predictions, right? It's not gonna happen. So that's one of the reasons we built Manifold, is so like you have like a sort of tangible, fun, gamified app where you can create your own markets and predict on them, or if other people have predictions that you disagree with, and then you know, you have your portfolio, you have like, you can go to the trade history and be like, see, I made this trade on this date at this %. It's really easy to look back and like assess yourself, and it also just holds you accountable because it's out there in the public. You don't have to use Manifold, you can use other sites as well. You could even just like write it in a journal if you really want to and you actually are gonna stick to it. But yeah, making sure you actually like write it down and it's or like you use an app and it's recorded somewhere is really important. Because that's what it is. It's just rewiring your brain to think like that. And the more you do it, like it's going to be better. Then the next thing is exposure. Like you kind of, and it should also say exposure, like challenging people on it. So like what I did with the example with Steven is just like talking a lot about things in terms of probabilities, exposing yourself to other people talking about things in terms of probabilities, just reading a lot. I asked in our Discord to like all our supercasters, like, what's the best way you guys got better at forecasting? They're just like reading a lot was like one of the main answers. But yeah, like what I did with Steven earlier, where I challenged him, like, hold on, you're saying it's very likely, like, give me like a percentage, give me some sort of number to that. I think that's really important to like try and actively do that. And yeah, like I said, listen out for people who say, I think this will happen, I predict, I bet. Whenever someone like says that, think in your head, oh, okay, they're making a prediction right now. What do I think the number of that prediction is? And if you think it's different from theirs, maybe challenge them and be like, oh, give me a number. And then it's important to reflect. Maybe even if you have like this record now of like your predictions, and maybe they're all right, and like congratulations, you're a super forecaster. But were they actually right because of like the reasons you thought? Maybe you predicted that you would have a great EAG because you would meet loads of awesome people and have a fantastic time. But then in reality, EAG was just great and it was worth it because the food was good. And like, so even though you're making that prediction that EAG is going to be good, you had like the completely wrong reason. So it's good to reflect and think, when I made this prediction, what was the reason? And even though like maybe I'm right or wrong, like how does it align with my reasoning? Determine the outside view / base rate. People, like for example, let's say with like sports gambling, right? There's like, they have like these AI and they're like years and years of statistical models and whatever to like come up with like a really good probabilities and odds for all their sports betting. But people still come along and think like, I know better than these like models. I love my team Liverpool. I'm gonna bet they're gonna win. And it's like, okay, sure, but like, do you really have an edge? So the first thing is just to like learn what, like, obviously for sports it's like pretty easy, you have like these things, but for a lot of like more like weird questions that are more abstract, it's kind of hard to find like a good base rate. So I mean, Manifold Markets is one place where you can see what the current market probability is. There's like different polls you can look at for elections, for example. But so the first thing is to just like identify some sort of like good outside view base rate. And then once you've determined that, just be honest with yourself, like what kind of edge do I actually have? So those are some practical tips to keep in mind as you get better at forecasting. Okay. Oh, it looks like I added a QR code, but it looks like it didn't get added. But maybe, I don't know if the slides will be available later. But anyways, here are some resources you can check out. So there's some more practical tips here. This was recommended by one of our like top users. It's really good. And then, yeah, use our website, Manifold Markets. You can just download it. It's in the Play Store on both Apple and Android, or you can just like check out on the web app. And then there's this past casting website, which is really good for getting fast feedback, because a lot of times you like make a prediction and then you have to wait like a year, and then you're like, oh, I was right, yay. But this allows you to like make a prediction on something that's already happened, but then it can, because it's already happened and it's resolved, it will immediately tell you whether you were right or not. So that's a pretty good tool. And then if you are like pretty new to prediction markets, Scott Alexander has a great FAQ, which is like super, super long. It's probably like will take you an hour or two to read, but there's that if you want. And then Rational Animations has like a fun little video that's good to show your friends if you ever want to introduce them to it. Yeah, so it looks like we have 5 minutes left, so I'm happy to take Q&A questions, but yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, David will have office hours right after this in the next room over. But yeah, we have time for a couple of questions. If you have them, submit them on swap card. The first question, Aiden asks, do you have your best steelman of the case that prediction markets are either not accurate or maybe even bad for the world?
Sorry, by steelman as in my defense against those attacks, right?
No, I think your best argument for those.
Oh, for those. Yeah. Okay. That it's bad for the world.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. There's like, yeah, honestly, I guess me not having an immediate good answer means that I don't have any really. I have like thought a bit, but the thinking I've thought more about is more the there's like weird ethical things about prediction markets. For example, there's like some people who are like predicting will there be like 20 mass shootings in America, and like trading on a market about that. And there's like, well, in one sense, it's actually like theoretically could be good, because if like it's a really high probability, then it's like, oh, there's going to be a lot of mass shootings, then we need to like do something about it. But it's like, okay, but maybe it's like not actually actionable, or like people don't want to know the information, or that the people who need to see that information aren't going to see it. And then it's kind of, well, at this point, we're just like gambling on how many like people are going to die from mass shootings. And that's like, sorry?
It incentivizes mass shooting as well.
Yeah, and it could theoretically incentivize it too, yes. If it was a real money market and people wanted to try and make a quick buck, they could bet yes on the market and then like go shoot some people. I guess that's true. There are like some perverse incentives that could theoretically happen. If someone made a market like, will the president get assassinated? Like someone could go bet yes on the market and assassinate the president, right? These are things, like we're Play Money Markets platform, we don't think that's an issue right now, but I guess like another issue for like that would actually be realistic for us, where anyone can create markets, is we have like some like high schoolers who use our site, and they make fun markets about like, will this person get a girlfriend, or will I get accepted into this school? I guess you could theoretically like almost incentivize bullying in some way. So there are some like weird things. I think as a whole though, in terms of like a forecasting tool, prediction markets, yeah, I fail to see how they can really be overly problematic, although I'd be curious if anyone has strong arguments, what they are afterwards, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, maybe a topic for office hours.
Yeah.
Sam has some points about, so they're sharing some ways in which forecasting systems might like have benefits. Like for instance, they give incentives for good comments under questions, which might solve the problem of insider trading you mentioned, and also might result in more informed participants. Sam asks, prediction markets generally don't do this? That's a question. Should they? And is Manifold exploring this avenue?
It's like kind of hard to hear.
Oh,
Can
sorry,
I just
yeah.
read it quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. The top one, right?
The top one, yeah.
Yeah, so we did try doing this. We had like this bounty system, but it just wasn't really a good interface. But yeah, I mean, we should try and incentivize more commenting. But like, why would you, right? Like, there's just no. Firstly, like, you give up some of your anonymity by drawing attention to yourself, which is a bad thing. Like some insider info, it's insider info for a reason. So I don't know if actually like commenting is like the best approach, because it's like, in practice it just doesn't work, I don't think. I don't know. It's like, this isn't really a good answer, but I just struggle to see in practice how it actually works. I've had other thoughts too, like, oh, well, if you could like highlight your bet and be like, I'm confident in this bet. This bet is like not me like being optimistic or trolling. That like some sort of like signal that like this bet like should influence what you believe about the market. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's cool. Maybe time for one more question. Aiden asks, why do you have to stipulate both the yes and no resolution criteria for the market to be functional? Doesn't no just need to be defined as not yes? So why do you need to stipulate both resolution as opposed to just one?
Yeah, sure. I guess the reason is because there are these unknown, like you don't always have to. Sometimes it's, will this football team win? If they win, yes. If they don't win, then no, right? It's very cut clear. But because you have like these weird scenarios that can come into play, as we kind of described, I think it's good to just get into the habit of outlining both the yes and no, like, especially if it's like kind of like a weird, more abstract question, to actually like outline like bullet points in the description. This are like some examples of yes, this is some examples of no. That way you really like get across the spirit of the question, and it's much easier. And then there's just times where like people like, there's something that you forgot to like include in the yes criteria that like comes up and happens, and you're like, oh, well, it should resolve no now, right? It's like, okay, well, at least if you have like a list of like both, then it'd be like, actually it's more in the gray area, and then you can have a more discussion about it. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. David's going to be in Quayside too right after this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.